Hello and welcome back to another episode of Twax Talk, the podcast by The Clear dedicated to the headier side of the cannabis industry. Today, I got another solo episode for you. James is actually out fighting the good fight for us right now. At the time of recording this, there is a bill in Colorado called SB076 that more or less would destroy the current cannabis industry in Colorado. Some of the restrictions they're trying to pass would involve banning anybody under the age of 25 from purchasing cannabis products with a THC content over 10%, which most of you listening know that that's just about every single cannabis product. So anybody under the age of 25 wouldn't be able to buy most cannabis products anymore. Among a bunch of other restrictions they're trying to add that would basically make it near impossible to operate within regulations and turn a profit in legal cannabis in Colorado. We're hoping that this is just something that, it's the last death throes of the prohibitionist movement here in Colorado, their last big push to try and, literally in their own words, put the genie back in the bottle of cannabis legalization and go back to the days of prohibition and the illicit market, which for some reason they don't think will come back if they decide to shut down legal cannabis access in Colorado. So if you are listening to this and it is before around mid-May, you can still reach out to your representatives if you're in Colorado and let them know that this bill should not be passed. I feel pretty confident that it won't, just because we have a decade of data of legal cannabis and more in Colorado to prove that it hasn't caused the harm that these prohibitionist groups claim, that the tax revenue and employment data alone should be enough to prove the reason to keep this industry around. But with that little spiel out of the way, more or less just explaining why James isn't here right now as the chief political officer for The Clear. He's the one who is actually on the front lines talking with regulators and legislators in Colorado, in Washington, D.C., about these laws that surround cannabis, which, as we all know, are constantly changing and evolving. They vary by state. And when it comes to the federal level, it's a whole other ballgame. So I guess think positive thoughts about James and this bill, and let's hope that we can get it through. But with that out of the way, we'll hop into this new episode of Twax Talk, a solo episode with me, your loving host, Travis. And today we're actually going to be talking about stoner stereotypes. So I'm actually excited to talk about this one because, believe it or not, this is almost full circle for me. So before we dive into the topic of stoner stereotypes, how do they apply today, if they apply at all? What did they used to be? What are they now? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to give a little bit of background on how I ended up in this industry to begin with. And that was really because of just a general love for weed. So my freshman year of college was 2013. Maybe that's old to you. Maybe that's young to you. I don't know. But around that same time is when I really started discovering my love for cannabis. So, you start making friends who also consume. You get your smoke buddies. You find your smoke spot on campus where you can sneak away without getting busted by the DA. I found a real connection with people that way and a real connection with the plant. But something that always bothered me was, back then, this is at a college in the middle of Virginia, 2013. Cannabis is nowhere close to being legal there at the time. So it was very much still the illicit market. So you never really knew what you were getting from the dealer on campus. You heard a lot of OG Kush and Blue Dream and Sour Diesel and whatever stereotypical strain names you could think of that your average dealer probably just knew off the top of their head. And the reality at the time also was the average person buying didn't really care what the strain was, as long as it smelled okay, smoked okay, got the job done. Back in those days, you really couldn't be too picky. But me, being me, I decided I was going to be a little more picky, and I wanted to actually know what I was consuming. You go to a liquor store, you buy whiskey, you know what whiskey is going to taste like for the most part. You buy vodka, you know what it's going to taste like, you know what it's going to do. Wine drunk versus liquor drunk versus beer drunk, etc. When it comes to weed, all that is a lot more cloudy, like to the average person, the difference between an indica high and a sativa high or a hybrid high is all very muddled these days because more or less everything is a hybrid. So there is no like pure sativa experience or pure indica experience unless you're taking those landrace strains that haven't been impacted by human intervention and still hold the original characteristics of the homeland that seed grew on its own before humans ever touched it. And I can tell you, if you're smoking on that, you're probably too heady for this podcast. And everything I'm going to be saying is going to be old news to you, and you probably don't care anyway. So anyway, I decided that I didn't trust what my dealers were telling me when I would pick up flower from them and they would say, oh, it's OG Kush or it's Blue Dream or whatever. I would say, okay, sure, whatever. And I would take it from them because, after all, like, I needed a supply. I wasn't going to actually say, like, oh, well, if this isn't, actual OG Kush from 1994 or 1998 Bubba or whatever, I'm not going to take it. Like, I didn't know enough about cannabis at the time to be that picky. It was more so like, if you're telling me you're selling me OG Kush, I want it to smell and taste like what OG Kush is supposed to smell and taste like. I don't think that's a crazy expectation to have. So when I would buy this stuff from guys on campus, I would cross-reference how it smelled, how it tasted, how it made me feel, more or less, the terpene and cannabinoid profiles. I would cross-reference that with specific strain data that was available at the time, mostly on Leafly. Now, I can hear you already saying, oh my gosh, like you're getting strain information from Leafly? Like what kind of amateur bullshit is that? I know what you're thinking, but this is 2013, mind you. So 12 years ago, there wasn't exactly a huge array of options when it came to cannabis information, especially when it came to strain-specific information. And at the time, unless you were going to like All Buds or these more in-depth forums where people are literally tracing the parentage and heritage of genetics all the way back to the base, Leafly was one of the better resources to get this information at the time. So that was the one that I used. And so if the dealer told me this is sour diesel, I would go on Leafly and look up the profile of sour diesel. And what do you know? A lot of the times, whatever they told me, the flavors, the smells, the effects really didn't match up at all with what Leafly was saying the strain should be smelling like, tasting like, and doing. And so I decided, you know what? If they're not going to tell me what it is, maybe I'll just try doing some research to see if I can figure out what it is. And so I took the strains they gave me. Say they said it was sour diesel. I went on Leafly, and based on the terpene profile, how it tasted, and how it made me feel, I used that data to search quote-unquote popular strains on Leafly at the time. It's not like Virginia was getting any crazy exotic stuff from NorCal, like unless you knew somebody who was shipping it. And even back then, that was a lot sketchier than it is today. So not many people were doing it. And I never personally did that for legal purposes, I'll say. So because I knew that we were only getting a certain level of quality in rural Virginia, where I was going to school at the time, it could only really be like a handful of genetics that would have made their way there. So I knew that, okay, like here are the 10 to 15 most popular strains, according to Leafly right now. Whatever I'm smoking is more than likely one of these strains, if not just like some random bag seed that a dealer grew and decided to start selling. There's always a chance of that happening. And so I started writing my own strain reviews. I started a blog where I would write strain reviews of here's what the dealer told me this was. Through my analysis, here is what I think it actually is. And I started putting out my own strain reviews to basically give like people locally on campus a resource to go to where if they're buying from the same people, they can come to my blog and find out, okay, like this is what it really is, and feel a little more confident in what they're consuming and what to expect with the experience. And long story short, that ends up turning into a cannabis culture and news blog that I ran for a few years while I was in college. Again, this is between 2013, 2016, 2017. In Virginia, not a big market for cannabis content or anything like that. So I start thinking, okay, how can I get more involved with cannabis, even though I'm stuck in Virginia. I'm a freshman in college. I'm a sophomore in college. I can't just drop out, and go to Colorado in 2013, right when they legalized, and try and join that industry, right? So I had to figure out how I could get involved more or less remotely. And because at the time I was majoring in writing at school, I decided that, you know what, like I'm already writing about cannabis. I like writing. I like cannabis. I might as well see if there's any way I can monetize writing about cannabis while I'm in college. And I ended up making some pretty good connections. And again, long story short, in 2014, so this would be my spring semester of my freshman year, I actually had a feature article published on the High Times website. And wouldn't you know it, the title of that article was 11 Stoner Stereotypes That No Longer Exist. So just to reiterate that, this article that I wrote came out April 9th, 2014. So over a decade ago, I wrote this article about stoner stereotypes that no longer apply because we had moved beyond that. Yet, here I am. The year is 2025. I have been writing about cannabis since 2013. Over 12 years, I have been writing about cannabis and more or less been, quote unquote, involved in the cannabis industry. And the fact that I'm here today about to talk about more stoner stereotypes that no longer apply just goes to show that as much education as we put out there, as much as from the grassroots movement side of things, it may look like things are on the up and up, things are getting better and better and better, there's still a huge movement pushing back on legalization. Just right now, at the time of recording this, it is February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2025. Rescheduling still hasn't happened for cannabis. We don't know what's going to happen with that. Prohibitionists are outspending the pro-legalization rescheduling movement at least 2-1 right now. So it is an uphill battle. They're fighting tooth and nail to prevent rescheduling from happening. If they could have it their way still today, they would make cannabis completely illegal in every single state again. Just like what I mentioned, they're more or less trying to do here in Colorado right now. So it just goes to show that all this time can pass, all this progress can be made, and there's still going to be those people who think stoners are lazy and, they don't work hard. They just sit in their living room on the couch watching movies, eating chips all day, doing nothing, not contributing to society, where today that just couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I'm the perfect example. I am someone who literally started writing about cannabis purely because I liked it. And I wanted to know what I was smoking on. And I was able to snowball that into a full-time career where now I work for a company like The Clear that is a regulated, established entity in the cannabis industry that's been operating legally for over a decade. And I mean, I don't know how you can look at that and say that it's some like seedy back alley business where everybody is just trying to rob each other and pull one over and make some profit and get out, and nothing is tested or regulated or safe, and everything is dangerous. And if you use cannabis, you're doomed. There's a lot of doom spiraling and catastrophizing and fear mongering when it comes to cannabis even today. So all that is to say, what I wanted to get around to for this episode is exploring some stoner stereotypes that I wrote about over a decade ago that people will still try and hold up today as a reason why cannabis shouldn't be legal. Now, I want to preface this by saying this was 2013. I was just starting college. I was by no means an experienced editorial writer or anything like that at the time. Honestly, I got this High Times feature out of some great connections and a lot of luck. It's by no means a masterful piece of written art that will be framed in museums about the history of cannabis legalization in the years to come. It is nothing crazy like that. It's literally a listicle. If you remember the early 2010s when the BuzzFeed lists were all the rage, that's what High Times was looking for at the time, so that's what I wrote for them. So we are just honestly, we're going to go through this article that I wrote in 2014 and explore some of these stereotypes and figure out how many of them are still being used against legal cannabis today, which ones have kind of faded into the background, and which ones have just completely dissipated and we've actually gotten over it, which wouldn't that be great, wouldn't it? So to start, number one is that stoners have a 5-word vocabulary. So basically, this goes along with stoners being uneducated, dumb, never learning anything, stationary in life, that sort of thing, where, you know, their main vocabulary is man, dude, and no way, and any sort of basic vocabulary that you could think of that, like, your average stoner surfer bro might be using, like when he was with his friends in the late 90s. That, believe it or not, used to be a very big stereotype used against people who used cannabis. It was that they were just dumb. And if you smoke cannabis, you were literally killing brain cells and making yourself dumber in the process. And over time, you would become less educated. Your IQ is going to drop, all that good stuff. I think it's safe to say that stereotype has long been dispelled. Again, I'm sitting here as proof. At least I would hope I don't come off sounding like an unintelligent, stupid person with a limited vocabulary. I even consider myself loquacious from time to time. That's me just being fancy for the sake of this. That just means using a lot of flowery language, more or less for no reason, which is what I like to do a lot just because I have nothing better to do. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, stoners aren't as dumb as people make them out to be. I mean, look at the multi-billion-dollar industry that we're in the process of building right now that is taking over America. I don't think a bunch of dumb people with no vocabulary or education could accomplish that. So I think we can cross that one off. That brings up the next one on the list, which is laziness. Now, this one, I think it depends on the person, really, where it's funny. One of the best quotes about cannabis that I ever heard was from Randy Marsh in South Park when he's talking to Stan, and his explanation of weed is basically, weed is good and it can be fun, it can be enjoyable, etc., but it can also make you okay with being bored, to where when you might otherwise be learning a new skill or going out, traveling, meeting people or whatever, you're more content just sitting on the couch being stoned because being stoned makes you feel more content with that lifestyle. And he's pretty close in that. And I guess by he, I mean the creators of South Park, which, what do you know, South Park, Colorado, it all fits. I think it really does just come down to the person. You know, where I have my days where I just want to get stoned and sit on the couch and do nothing, maybe watch a movie, play some video games, and just munch and be lazy. And I think all of us deserve to be able to do that from time to time if we want to. But, you know, I work a 9-to-5, Monday to Friday job at a corporate office in a cubicle for a cannabis company. I would by no means call that lazy. You know, I'm a functional member of society. I have a pet. I go grocery shopping. I pay taxes, all that good stuff. You know, I have hobbies. And I think most people who use cannabis today would be in the same boat where, just like people who like to enjoy a glass of whiskey after work, they aren't lazy because of that. You know, if they like to go out with their friends to the club on weekends and maybe they have 5 drinks instead of 2 and they like to get a little drunk, you know, like that doesn't make anybody lazy. It means they like to enjoy themselves in different ways. And it really comes down to the person and how much they let whatever substances they decide to use impact their personality, their lifestyle, and letting it control them in a way that it shouldn't. And I think today, with the education surrounding cannabis, the relationship between the individual and cannabis has evolved to become a lot more educated and sophisticated, where I think people are a lot more aware of the benefits and the cons of cannabis use, whether short-term or long-term, regular, heavy use, etc. And people can figure out a lot more quickly now, like, here's what's going to work for me. Here's what I can't do if I want to stay productive, etc., where it's not as much a guessing game, at least in the legal markets. For those people still not operating, but living in markets where recreational or medical cannabis isn't legal, maybe you have access to intoxicating hemp products. Unfortunately, they don't tend to be as reliable as safe, regulated, legal cannabis products that you buy from a licensed retailer. Twax Talk is brought to you by Twax, by The Clear. If you don't know, Twax is infused pre-rolls utilizing full premium flower, never shake or trim, combined with the well-known flavors of oil provided by The Clear to create some incredible tasting pre-rolls like lime sorbet or banana cream or some of the classics like OG and lemon haze. If you live in a state with legal cannabis access, go to your dispensary and keep an eye out for Twax on the shelves. So with intoxicating hemp, I can see the appeal when it comes to choosing between the dealer down the street and a online storefront that looks pretty legit. They have some good marketing. They have some nice packaging. They have an about section that talks about their dedication to quality and all that stuff. It does appear to be the safer, more legit option than the illicit market. And in a lot of ways, it may be. But the reality is, when it comes to intoxicating hemp, it still more or less is the illicit market because there is no actual federal regulation on these intoxicating hemp products. And in most cases, there's no state regulation on these products either. So depending on the state you're in, I highly recommend looking up what products are legal there when it comes to intoxicating hemp and cannabis. If you have medical access, maybe you consider getting a medical card. If you have recreational access, I personally wouldn't even bother with intoxicating hemp. I just don't think it's worth the risk. But again, it comes down to the individual. And this all comes back to just say, today we have more knowledge about how we interact with cannabis products than ever before, and we can make a lot more informed decisions about the products we're consuming, how much flower we're smoking, how big our joints are, you know, how much keef is going into it, whatever you want to think about. But we are no longer the lazy stoners that people used to think we were, and that's just a fact. So now moving on, this one's quick and easy. I think we could more or less skip this. That we only wear tie-dye shirts. I think it's safe to say the whole like hippie movement that did help drive cannabis forward in the 70s, 80s, even like the 90s has more or less faded out. You could argue that it's been replaced with the like wook EDM festival culture and that sort of thing. Although I feel like those people maybe lean more into the psychedelic substances than cannabis these days. So I think it's safe to say, you know, we're not all walking around wearing tie-dye shirts. We don't all have dreadlocks and wearing Rasta colors or whatever with hemp backpacks and stuff like that. Now, I will say, when I was in high school, I did think it was pretty cool to have a hemp backpack. And Rasta colors are a pretty good color scheme. What can you say? I'm not going to shit on red, green, and gold. You know, it's a good combo. Anyway, we can just move on from that one. And the next one is 420 means it's smoking time. Now, this one, I think can go either way because I think a lot of people still, the 420 movement has only grown as legalization has spread. Every state at this point has some sort of 420 themed holiday on April 20th every year, whether it's an event downtown or dispensaries just having a bunch of promos and stuff like that. There's always something going on the actual date. But when it comes down to the time of 4:20 p.m. or 4:20 a.m., if you're that crazy, I don't think the whole mentality of like 420 blaze it is as big as it used to be, especially because a lot of people who, you know, originally pushed that sort of mentality and with the 420 movement and all that as legalization started rolling out in the early 2010s, they're all older now. We're all older now. That's how time works, is we all age and get older. But most of these people, you know, they have a full-time job. You can't smoke at 4:20 if you're working until 5. So for a lot of people, maybe it's 5:20 or it's 6:20 or it's just whatever time they feel like is good for them to go home and get a little stoned. And There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you can stay functional and do what you need to do, I don't think there's any wrong time to enjoy a little bit of cannabis. Unless it's like 3:13 a.m. I think that's like the demon hour or something like that. So, but you do you. Moving on from that one, this one definitely has changed over the time. We're friends with sketchy drug dealers. Now, all of us have that one friend that we're still friends with today who lost a lot of money when their state decided to go legal. Let's just put it that way. We all had to know somebody back in the day because that was the only way you could get anything. And nowadays, if you live in a market with legal access, that just isn't a concern, and there's plenty of states that still allow home growing, so people can grow their own, and you can legally gift what you grow to a friend if you want to, and that friend legally could donate some money to you if they wanted, or you just gift it to them for free because, when you grow your own weed, you tend to have a lot of it that you don't mind sharing. So it's a lot easier to just get quality stuff, knowing what you're getting when you have legal access. And even with intoxicating hemp stuff online, again, it may not actually be truthful information or the most accurate, but you at least have some sort of general idea of the product you're getting versus going to the local guy and just not knowing what it is and just having to take their word for it, which, is probably never a great idea. This next one may still ring true, at least for me personally, is about us having poor posture as I sit here with my shoulders hunched down and my back hunched. And I definitely have my own personal issues with posture, but that's just me. I wouldn't apply it to the entire world of cannabis consumers. I think that might be a little over the top. But this one was just a funny one. Maybe this was a filler for the list, but the description we wrote was the kid sitting in the back of the class that looks like he's been cut in half because he's slouched so low is now sitting at the head of the class, fully erect, no pun intended apparently, and paying full attention. Now, maybe that was a little hyperbolic. I was never at the head of the class sitting straight up with my tie on, like waving my hand, waiting for the professor to pick me. I was never that sort of kid or that sort of student. But I think really, I look at this one more as a pro. Is you see it as poor posture. I see it as my body is just relaxed all the time to the point where I just look like I have poor posture, but really I'm just chilling. Next is we're in a constant state of confusion. This one maybe again applies to me a little personally, but that could just be the ADHD and my terrible attention span. But, there was the stereotype back in the day of the stoner with their head in the clouds where they're never paying attention to anything. They're just, walking through life with their head in the clouds, not paying attention to what's going on around them, whatever. They don't care about anything or anybody, and they're just living their life happy and stoned. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who do that, plenty of people who live their life that way. I wouldn't quite call it a state of confusion. I would just say maybe a state of like spacing out, daydreaming, etc. I think cannabis maybe can enhance that aspect in some people where it makes it easier to daydream and get lost in that train of thought. And next thing you know, it's been several minutes and you realize, oh wow, like I've just been staring at the wall thinking about this for the last 10 minutes. I know I've been there. I'm sure you've been there too. I honestly wouldn't call that so much of a stereotype as it's more of an observation. Some people are going to be like that. Some people aren't. And that's just how it goes. And then, of course, the classic, because I got high excuse. You're all familiar with the song from Afro Man. I was going to clean my room until I got high. That I'm sure, again, applies to some people where you get home from work and you're thinking, all right, I just got home. I'm still in that productive mentality. I'm going to be productive. Maybe I'm going to do the dishes or I'm going to vacuum. And then you're like, you know what? I'm going to take a little puff first. And you take that little hit. And next thing you know, it's been 45 minutes. You're sitting on the couch watching TV and it hits you. Oh yeah, I was going to do some dishes or I was going to vacuum. I think that can happen from time to time. And, when it comes to important things, I would think that most of us can stay on top of our shit, more or less, where if it's something really important, like, oh man, I need to go to my brother's wedding today, I would hope that a puff off a vape isn't going to make you forget that. But when it comes to the little things of like, I was supposed to do laundry, but I forgot because I got a little stoned and then started watching a TV show and lost track of time, like, that's not the end of the world. I feel like that's one of those ones that's really just an excuse for people who are anti-weed to shame people who use it by saying like, I'm more productive and I get more done than you because I'm not getting stoned. When it's like everybody moves at their own pace to begin with without cannabis involved, So just because somebody uses cannabis, that's not always what's impacting their ability to do something or their will to do something. There could be other aspects involved. You don't know what people are dealing with. So that's what that one comes down to, is it comes down to the individual, If you don't have a work ethic when you're sober, you're not going to magically get one on weed, Just like if you have a work ethic when you're sober, that's not just going to go away when you're stoned. I'm sure there's the chance that it turns into an abusive relationship with cannabis, and in which case it can impact your work ethic. And in that case, you need to reassess your use and all that stuff, but we're not getting into any of that right now. I think for most people, it's a case-by-case basis. It depends on the individual, and this was just a generalization that no longer applies. But the next one, actually, I would say the next two definitely still apply today. But again, this just comes down to education and the huge need for it going forward in this industry, with number 9 being that we are paranoid and number 10 being that we're slaves to the munchies. Now, me, I'm already a generally anxious person. I would not say that cannabis makes me more anxious. I would say in some cases it helps with my anxiety, and in other cases it doesn't really do anything at all. It doesn't make it worse, but it just kind of like makes it a little more noticeable in my mind, where you know how it is when you get a little stoned, you start thinking a little more deeply about random things that pop into your head. And it's one of those things where if I'm already a little anxious and I'm not really thinking about it and I smoke some weed, I start thinking about my anxiety a little bit more, and maybe I start stressing a little bit more. But, that's more of a mental thing for me personally, and anxiety versus weed giving me that anxiety. Whereas for some people, it can be hyper specific, where if they smoke something that leans towards sativa or the more uplifting, energetic stuff, they can get super paranoid. And vice versa, some people who do the more indica leaning, couch lock, more relaxing stuff, that can make them super paranoid. And then some people, they take a sativa leaning strain and they can go to sleep, whereas other people, sativa is the energetic one for them. So it really depends on the person and how their endocannabinoid system within their body actually interacts with cannabis to create the specific effects that you feel, which is why what strain is great for you may not always be great for the next person. So it's always important to be subjective about how it makes you feel and not try to push that on somebody else, thinking that how you feel from a cannabis product is exactly how they're going to feel, because every cannabis product is going to affect people differently. And that's why we always recommend to start low and go slow and work your way up so you can figure out what you're comfortable with and ideally avoid something like paranoia altogether. And as for the munchies, I know for a fact that I'm not alone in the daily struggle with the munchies, where it's just something that cannabis does. It's literally a chemical reaction in your brain that tricks your mind into thinking that you are still hungry even when you're not. And there are some strains that are becoming more popular, particularly with the cannabinoids THCV. I think it's tetrahydrocannabivarin, something like that. That has been known to act as a appetite suppressant. So strains that have a higher concentration of THCV may actually help at least slow down the munchies a little bit. But, I think it's one of those things where if you can learn to control it as hard as that is. I'm saying this is somebody who has been an avid cannabis consumer for over a decade, and I still struggle with the munchies every day. It's one of those things where if you can develop a decent relationship with it, where, you know, you're replacing your snacks with healthier snacks, then it really isn't that big of a problem if you have the munchies, because you're not eating stuff that is harmful to your health over the long term. Or you can be like me and not buy snacks, because if you have any snacks, you will devour all of them. And then you end up just eating random slices of deli meat from your fridge because that's all you have. I don't recommend that. It's depressing. But anyway, we can just move on from that one. You know, munchies is just part of it. That comes with certain cannabis strains and certain genetics. And if you can figure out, you know, stay a little more aware of, hey, this strain made me really hungry, but this strain didn't. If you can keep track of that, you can go forward. And when you're buying cannabis products, you can say, I'm looking for something similar to this because this one didn't give me the munchies. And you can kind of start exploring the different products that might fit in that vein, which I will say we are still a little behind on having the diversity of options when it comes to that specific of an experience. Mainly just because, obviously, when it comes to cannabis flower, most of it has been bred to have the highest THC. Minor cannabinoids haven't had much focus or prevalence in flower. That is changing, but it's still going to be some time before every dispensary is going to have minor cannabinoid flower that's going to be 1-to-1 THC and CBN or THCV or whatever. That's going to take some time. But in the meantime, if you're in Colorado, we do have the Clear Effects line that has launched, which has 6 different minor cannabinoid infused flavors, from Focus, Energy, Escape, Recover, Rest, and Relax, all of which have minor cannabinoids combined with THC in precise ratios, so you can get the benefits of those minor cannabinoids and THC without going overboard, without getting stoned. This is something that you can take, especially with our low-dose tablets that are only 2.5 milligrams each. This is something you can actually take throughout the day that can help with your focus and your energy and helping you wind down after work without actually feeling that stony high from THC. And I know, like, it does sound like it's some crazy woo-woo science stuff, and it sort of is. Asa, our expert formulator here at The Clear, developed this whole thing. He came from the pharmaceutical industry, so this is a guy who knows his stuff, and I couldn't even begin to understand the complexities of how all this came to be, but I can assure you that these products work and they're incredible. And if you are in Colorado, I highly recommend going to your dispensary and asking if they carry our effects line and giving it a try for yourself and letting us know what you think. And lastly, this one I had to just throw in just for fun, was that we frequently dissolve into giggle fits. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, this was a earlier, younger stoner days sort of experience, you know, where you're in college with your buddies and you just picked up that fresh ounce from your guy that you all went in on to split, and you're packing up that first bowl and you're throwing on your favorite TV show afterwards, and you're all together enjoying the experience and you're having a good laugh at the show you're watching. And next thing you know, you're all just laughing uncontrollably. I feel like that definitely changes as you get older, you know. You're not hanging out with friends in that way as frequently anymore. And dissolving into a giggle fit while you're sitting alone at home isn't, I would say, the most common thing. You know, if you do that, that's awesome. I love that for you. I do it from time to time. But I think it's just one of those things that with age, you know, we get older, our friends groups change. We're not with as many people when we're consuming cannabis anymore. So there's just less opportunity for the giggle fits. That doesn't mean they're gone. It's not like you mature to the point where you can't have a giggle fit anymore. I think it's just something that it's become more rare as cannabis has become more of a individual experience, where it used to be a lot more of a social experience with friends. Not to say that it isn't still and that it can't be now. Like I said, you know, I'm going in circles here. You know what I'm saying. You get older, friend groups drift apart. You don't have as many friends as you used to. You're not hanging out with as many people as you used to. You're not doing the smoke circles anymore unless you're going to events and stuff. less opportunity. That's all. And that is the end of the list. So, how does that sound for a 18-year-old, a freshman in college, writing about stoner stereotypes that no longer exist in the year 2014, over a decade ago? How many of these stereotypes to you sound like they're still around, they're still prevalent? How many of them sound like they were bullshit from the start? I think a good chunk of them were. But the reality is, some of these stereotypes are still being used today. And it's crazy to think, when I look back on how I started writing about cannabis in 2013, I remember telling my friends, by the time I graduated, it had to be legal. Like, Colorado was the first step in 2013. And once everybody saw how well it went, everybody was going to get on board. And now here we are in 2025. Yeah, 40 some states have recreational or medical cannabis laws on the books in some regard. But it still blows my mind that a decade after I wrote this article, we still don't have federal legalization. There's still plenty of states that don't have legal recreational cannabis access. There's still states that don't have medical cannabis access after all this time. And it really just goes to show the power of the prohibitionist movement and the people that don't want to see this industry succeed. They don't want to see people get access to this, whether it's medical or recreational. They have some serious power behind them. They have a lot of money, way more money than we do in the cannabis industry to fight them. And that's why it really comes down to all of our individual efforts. Like, I started writing about cannabis because I cared about the plant. I cared about the product I was getting, and I cared about the consumer, where I wanted the consumer, myself included, to know what they were getting and feel confident in their products. And here we are over a decade later. Now there's this new wave of intoxicating hemp where it's so close to real, legal, recreational cannabis access. The problem is it's all done in a gray area in 6 sentences of a 500-page bill that passed in 2018. And it's all based on the fact that some words were excluded. There's nothing explicitly saying all these other cannabinoids are federally legal now. All it said was, as long as it's not delta-9 THC over 0.3%, then it's technically federally legal. And then people figured out the loopholes, and now we are where we are. And it just goes to show that somehow we can come this far. We can do literally everything but just have federal legalization. And it should make all of us wonder, why are we in this situation right now? Why are we where we are today? Why is it that we don't have federal legalization? Who are these forces fighting it? A lot of stuff today comes down to like red versus blue, Republicans versus Democrats, when the reality is, you would be surprised which politicians on both sides are fighting cannabis legalization. Because the reality is, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. You have pharmaceutical companies and tobacco companies and alcohol companies coming to you and offering you very large sums of money to favor them when it comes to legislation and that sort of thing, and preventing stuff like legal cannabis, not to mention police unions. There is a lot of money going into the pockets of politicians to fight this. And it's really going to take the politicians themselves finally stepping up and saying, look, we are doing this because it's right, not because we're going to profit off of it, not because Big Pharma's paying us or because Big Pharma stopped paying us, so now we're going to do it to spite them. It should be done because at this point, why not? Everybody knows it's more or less alcohol at this point. If you can go into a store and buy alcohol, you should be able to go into a store and buy cannabis. It's that simple. We've learned enough over this last decade. All these years I've been writing about it, trying to educate people about it. I think the average person's knowledge regarding cannabis is so far beyond what it was when I was writing that article in 2014 that even if you ask somebody who's never used cannabis today, how many of those stereotypes on that list do you think apply? They probably would not agree with most of it. And that's kind of the silver lining, is all this education that we're doing, all this work that we're putting in, this whole industry. I'm not just talking about me writing about it or the Clear trying to educate people about our product specifically. I'm talking about the industry as a whole, people who just love cannabis. This started as a grassroots movement of people who found a plant that grew naturally on this earth and realized the insane benefits it has recreationally and medically. And just sharing those benefits with as many people as possible and letting people know that in some cases, like, it is an alternative medicine that you can try, or it is a good recreational alternative to alcohol for people who may be trying to quit, or people who just want something to enjoy, to enhance their evening or their rest or hanging out with friends, whatever. There is no set thing that you need to do to be a cannabis consumer. You know, like, you don't have to live this lifestyle and do these activities at this time in order to consume cannabis the right way. Just like with alcohol, you know, if you want to drink after work, you go get a drink after work. Nobody's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're drinking after work. Yet, if you go to the dispensary and grab a joint after work, people are like, oh my gosh, you went straight from work to the dispensary to get weed? Wow. It's just the mentality is still so different between cannabis and alcohol, despite both of them just being regular run-of-the-mill recreational substances. They both interact with your brain and cause a reaction that makes you feel drunk or high. It really comes down to what's your preference? Which one do you want to feel? And if people should be allowed legal access to alcohol for recreational use, people should be allowed legal access to recreational cannabis for the same reason. And I will end my spiel on that. So, thank you for tuning in to another lengthy solo episode of Twax Talk. I always intend on these episodes only being like 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes tops. But what do you know? Like I said, I tend to be a talkative individual, and I wouldn't start a podcast about cannabis if it wasn't a topic that I was extremely passionate about. If you can't tell, it's something that I love talking about. I can talk about it forever, as you can tell. So if you ever have questions about cannabis, you just want to shoot the shit about it, you know, you can shoot us a DM. That's direct message for our older listeners on Instagram or Facebook. Our tag is The Clear Brands. It's all one word. You just search us up. Our page will pop up. You can shoot us a message if you have questions about our products or just cannabis in general. You can also go to theclearbrands.com, our website. You can see the sort of products that we carry. We're in multiple states across the country. You can get our vape pens, our infused pre-rolls, etc. And we also have a lot of great education on the website, too, about cannabis and extracts and dosing and getting into it for the first time and getting into it if you're a little older and that sort of thing. So if it's something you're curious about, we have a lot of great information you can find there. And on that note, I guess we'll end this episode of Twax Talk. I hope you learned something from it. Hopefully it wasn't just me rambling a bunch of useless information that you don't care about. And I will catch you in the next one. Twax Talk is brought to you by The Clear Brands. Started in 2013 in Colorado, for over a decade, The Clear has been providing top-shelf premium distillate vapes to a wide range of markets across the country. If you're looking for a vape that provides the best experience possible without cutting corners, you want to try The Clear Brands. Now, when it comes to distillate, none of it is created equally. You can find $5 distillate and you can find higher end distillate like The Clear. And the difference really comes down to how it's processed. And the reality is that cheaper distillate, they're not putting as much effort and time into processing it, and you're getting a less clean, pure product in the end that's not going to taste as good. It's going to burn more quickly. It's going to clog up more quickly. And in the end, you're going to end up just wasting money on a low tier product. So if you're interested in a cartridge or an all-in-one that's going to last longer, taste better until the last drop, thanks to the premium hardware that The Clear provides, head over to your local dispensary in a legal recreational state and ask your bud tender if they carry vapes by The Clear.